Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at the Sako M92S. This is the civilian semi-auto version of the Finnish AK-95 assault rifle. RK, by the way, is a Finnish abbreviation for assault rifle. It is, of course, select fire. This is semi-automatic only, and it has a couple of slightly different features for the civilian market than the military rifles had. Now, I have a full video on the actual military RK-95. I will link to that down in the description text below. If you're interested in the details of the adoption and development of that rifle, definitely check out that video. The short version is, by the 1990s, the Finnish military had some use for some new rifles. And Sako, at the time, it was actually Sako Valmet. They were in the process of consolidating under the same ownership. They decided to essentially start from scratch. Instead of continuing to make a stamped receiver M76 or a milled receiver M62 like they had been doing since the 1960s or 70s, well, now they have CNC machine tools. They have, they're not using the same production tooling that they did in the 1960s, so there's a lot less reason to just keep making the same gun. If we're going to put this thing on a CNC, let's start from scratch and give it some additional capabilities. So they developed a rifle that was suitable for rifle grenade launching, although they never actually did adopt any rifle grenades for it. Has a new, stronger receiver, has a dust cover that still has the receiver, the dust cover mounted sights, but now there's a locking mechanism to clamp down and improve zero hold on the dust cover. There are a number of new features to this rifle. And they went ahead and made a civilian version of it. Now, the civilian sales of these rifles were partly for civilians who were interested in owning one, whether that be for hunting or sport shooting or collecting purposes. But it's important to point out that in Finland, this was also largely done for the sake of reservist training organizations. Finland has a massive military reserves system. There's a lot of public participation in this reservist-based military system. And there is at least one major organization that does firearms training for civilians and reservists. But they're a civilian organization, like they're military adjacent, but they're not actually part of the military. And so it is quite difficult for these guys to actually have machine guns. It's a lot easier for them to have less regulated, simple semi-automatic rifles. And so Sako made a semi-auto version. They similarly had made an M92S semi-auto, although that was mostly for export to the United States. But by the time these were being made, they couldn't be legally exported to the United States because of US import laws. So a big part of the reason for this is for training organizations, reservist organizations in Finland, to be able to train civilians with semi-automatic rifles that are as similar as possible to what the military is getting. So with that aside, let's go ahead and take a closer look and let me show you the novel features of the RK-95 platform as an AK and what specifically was different about the semi-auto M92 version. All right, there is the whole thing. It barely fits on the screen here. First off, let me start with the magazine. This is, of course, chambered for 7.62 by 39. It was still the standard Finnish infantry rifle cartridge. Really a holdover from, well, back to the 1960s. It will use all standard AK mags, but this is an example of the polymer magazine that the Finnish Defense Forces developed later on. So kind of cool to have this. The distinctive thing you will find about Finnish AK mags is they all have a lanyard strap hook on them. So on these plastic ones, it's out here on the front. On the metal ones, it's attached to the floor plate. So on the back of the receiver, we have manufacturer markings, starting with Sako. Now, originally, Sako was specifically the Finnish Civil Guard arms manufacturing and repair company, and VKT was the state rifle factory. Now, after World War II, VKT and a number of other state factories, like the state aircraft factory and the state artillery factory, they all conglomerated together to become a commercial enterprise called Valmet, which is the state metalworks. Valtion Met something. I'm not even going to try it in Finnish. At any rate, most of these rifles, most of the semi-autos that we refer to as Valmets were in fact manufactured by Valmet. However, by the time we get to the M92, Valmet and Sako were in the process of merging. By the time the M92 is in production, the whole company is just Sako. and it remains Sako today. Valmet has disappeared. There was a third Finnish small arms factory that was Tikkakoski. That has also consolidated into Sako. Sako currently uses owns and uses the Tikkakoski brand, but Tikka and Sako are both made in the same factory today. Anyway, getting back to our actual gun here, caliber 7.62 by 39, made in Finland, and a little Finnish Lion proof mark there. We have the last 4 digits of the serial number up here on the top cover. As with all of the Valmet and Sako rifles, the serial number is on the front of the receiver out here. The M92S are in a serial number range starting at 400,001. And the only other mark here is an import mark here, PRI, that is Post Rock Inc. or Post Rock Imports out of Garden City, Kansas. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, a number of distinctive elements of the RK95 and the M92S. The biggest one right off the bat is the receiver. So this is not a standard M62 Valmet receiver. In fact, for reference, here is a regular M62 receiver, and you can see a bunch of the profiles are different, especially most distinctively right up here at the front. Functionally, it's the same. They both use AK standard internals, but the idea was Sako was making these guns without using the original M62 tooling because, well, they have much more modern equipment. They have CNC machines now, and so this is an opportunity to kind of start from scratch and redesign the receiver to do better things, to be more manufacturable, to be stronger, etc., using the current manufacturing technology. So they added a few other features, and by the way, all of these things that I'm going over now are common to both the M92 Semi and the RK95 military rifles. They have an upturned bolt handle here. We have this new style of dust cover mounted rear sight. This has 2 apertures in it. One is close range, one is long range. And it originally had a luminous night sight here. Now, some of the M92Ss have that. This one doesn't. I don't know how prevalent it is to have them or not, but I have seen examples both ways. And by the way, the rear aperture sight here sits in the center position for use with the night sights. So you've got your large aperture for close range, you've got your small aperture for precision long range, and then when you want to use the night sight, you just flip it down into the middle position to get it out of the way. Similarly, the front sight has a flip-up luminous night sight, and again, this example does not. It's got the flip-up piece, but no luminous tritium element in it. Like I said, some of the M92Ss I've seen do have that, but this one doesn't. We also have some changes up here on the gas block, most distinctively a gas cutoff. So if you lift this lever up, it cuts off the gas, which allows you to then launch rifle grenades. Now, the Finnish military went to the trouble of getting this system developed and included in the rifles, and then actually never adopted any rifle grenades. So they never got used. The RK95s have a muzzle device that has grenade rings on it. This one does not, although again, this is a slightly different pattern than I've seen on other M92Ss. So take that as you will. There may be multiple different versions that were used. They did also include a bayonet lug on both the civilian and the military rifles, but also, once again, never adopted a bayonet for it. So aside from a small number of bayonets that were actually bought for use by ceremonial guards, like at the Presidential Palace, there's no combat bayonet for the RK95, but both it and the M92 get a bayonet lug anyway. Back here on the dust cover, we have this screw piece, which is, oh, it's really tight right now. What you would normally do is use a cartridge case head to loosen that. This tightens down the back end of the dust cover to help maintain zero for the rear sight. So when you disassemble the gun, you unscrew this. It's got a little limiter pin so that you've only got one revolution to work with. Unscrew it 1 revolution, that's more than enough to take off the dust cover to do any cleaning. There are also 3 holes drilled and tapped in the side of the receiver, again, for both the M92 and the RK95. On the military rifles, these were originally set up so that you could add a rail, kind of like this, for the use of the VV2000 night vision scope. Most early rifles, when you're talking about like late Cold War period, the guns that were set up for optics mounting, and this includes most of the AK siderail systems, they were not set up for regular soldier daytime optics. Those scope mounting rails were there primarily for night vision scopes. That was the technology that militaries wanted to exploit. Now, this has become quite convenient for people who want to mount optics, modern optics, regular daytime magnified optics or red dot optics on guns. The Finnish military did go ahead and do that with its RK95s, and we actually have a scope mount assembly here. This comes from Value Manufacturing, or Valman. It's their AK 2.0 system, which is very closely copied by the current Finnish military modernizations of the RK62 and the RK95. This clamps onto the rail here and then gives you Picatinny up over the top to mount an optic. And one last feature before we take it apart is the butt stock. The military RK95s all had side folding stocks that look very much like this. However, for the civilian market, Sako went ahead and made a fixed stock instead. And the reason is, if the gun had a folding stock, it would have actually been a lot more difficult for civilian owners to license and own because of overall length restrictions in Finnish law at that time. They measured the length of a rifle, if it had a folding stock, by the folded length, not by the extended length. And with a folding stock, this fell into a much more restrictive category. So by including a fixed stock on it instead, it was just a lot simpler for civilian ownership, and that was the whole point of the rifle. So fixed stock on the gun. There is one additional little surprise here in the stock. Normally you would unscrew this with a coin or perhaps a cartridge case, but I'm going to use a screwdriver. Inside here is a cleaning kit. Well, 3 pieces of a cleaning rod screwed into this plug that screws into the top tube of the buttstock. So the RK62 had a cleaning rod stored in the tube stock or cleaning kit in there, and so does the RK95, and that's a feature that they left in place on the M92 semi-autos. All right, I've loosened that. We can take the dust cover off. The rest of the parts inside here are really pretty standardized. We've got our recoil spring guide and recoil spring, our bolt carrier and bolt assembly. These are essentially identical to the RK62, the M62S semi-autos. All of the Valmet semi-autos have a slightly different takedown method here because they don't have a rear sight block back here. The gas tube disassembly is different than a typical AK. This is kind of the same as you would have on a Galil because the Galil was developed from the Finnish Valmets. So the gas tube just has a pair of ribs back here that lock into the front trunnion. This slides out of the handguard. We would then unscrew this nut and bring the handguard retainer forward. Honestly, there's not a whole lot of reason you need to do this, because when you do it, there we go. We get our 2-piece handguard. There is no metal heat shield inside. And then, there you go. Barrel underneath the handguard. Very standard AK semi-auto fire control group. The stock is held in place by this big roll pin. If you punch that out, the whole stock assembly comes off. And there you go. There is the Sako M92S semi-auto, all field stripped. There were only about 2,500 of the M92S rifles manufactured, all in a single production run in the early mid 1990s. And the reason is, in fact, RK95 military production of this sort of rifle ended very abruptly. It had been developed starting in the late 1980s, when there was still obviously the huge potential threat from the Soviet Union. And then in the early 90s, the Soviet Union collapses. Finland's very unpleasant eastern neighbor no longer looked like really nearly as much of a threat as it had in the past. And so military funding was cut across the board on a bunch of things, not just in Finland, but largely throughout Europe. Obviously, that situation has changed quite a lot now, but at the time, in fact, it's interesting, I go over this in my RK95 video, but the Finnish government actually planned to just cancel production completely, which would have really chopped the legs out from Sako at the time, who had put all of this money into developing the rifle, anticipating large production contracts. And so an accommodation was reached where the Finnish Defense Forces purchased a couple small batches of rifles, basically to allow Sako to at least recoup its development costs and sort of scale its production line down instead of just cutting it off immediately and completely. But as a result, there were never any more of the M92Ss manufactured. And that brings us to the interesting epilogue to this story that takes place only in 2025, and that is because these rifles were, as I mentioned at the beginning, not importable into the US. When they were made, like, tough cookies, can't bring this into the US. It was a unicorn of a gun. However, in 2025, a little company called Post Rock in Kansas, a gun shop and import company, went through the process of actually petitioning ATF to add this rifle and all of the other Valmet/Sako factory semi-auto rifles onto the curio and relic list. And well, I don't think that's the full detail of the story, because that shouldn't by itself make them importable because of the assault weapon ban imports. And I'm not totally clear on all the details here, but essentially they petitioned ATF and got these guns, just flip a switch, now they're importable. And so if you've been seeing these show up in US sales on Gunbroker or various auction sites, that is why, because through this one company's actions, these have become importable guns, along with, interestingly, all the rest of the Valmet semi-autos. So the M62s, the M71s, 76s, folding stock 76s, M82 bullpups, and there's like this weird smorgasbord of M78s and M83s. Valmet/Sako, well, Valmet did a bunch of sort of quasi-experimental commercial rifle projects. All of those guns are now importable. So there have been a number of people kind of scouring Finland to find these, buy them up, and then import them to the US, where they bring tremendously greater value than they have in Finland. There's always been sort of a low-scale market for them in Finland. Pretty much everyone who really wanted one kind of had one. But the American market vastly overwhelms the Finnish market for these. So that's why you're seeing them start to show up here. Anyway, thanks to Post Rock for making that possible. This one is actually a gun that I bought myself in Finland years ago, never expecting to be able to import it. I just wanted to have it to be able to shoot over there. And then lo and behold, they become importable. And so you saw the import mark on this one. Post Rock thoughtfully imported it for me, but they didn't give it to me because this was already my property over there. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.